So as I'd indicated in my last video where I was making these soil blocks, the method I've elected to water them is a tray that has got holes in the bottom so that I can just immerse them in water in a bigger tray for a short while, just to let them get watered from the base and then pull them out. And that should probably be enough. I'll keep an eye on it. I can already see the seeds germinating in the soil blocks, which is great news. So I'll get that one back into the cold frame. It's another lovely day today, and I'm going to carry on with the irrigation that I'm planning for the polytunnel. So I bought one of these kits, and it's a budget kit, but I've had an irrigation system before. I used it in the back garden, and it was quite an unwieldy set of hoses and various fittings. So I guess you learn as you go along with these things. And what I wanted to achieve on this occasion was something that was much more flexible. So to start with, I chose a hose that really is pliable, so that I don't have to make too many twists and turns, adding corners and T-junctions and things. This will travel quite freely into different directions. So that was one key element. It has the smaller gauge of hose also that most of the drippers and sprayers that you can buy fit onto. And with this kit, various drippers and bits and bobs came with it. The next really key thing was the previous irrigation system I used. You had to puncture the hose and push the fitting in. And that was very limiting, because once you'd made that hole, you were pretty much fixed. And what I wanted is something that I could change if I had the need to move the sprinklers and the drippers around. So I chose a kit that has a fitting that you can basically cut the length hose you want and put it into the fitting, and then the smaller gauge of hose comes off of it. So if you had a distance like that, but later you wanted a bigger distance, all you needed to do is take that one piece of hose out and add a longer piece. And that's much more flexibility than I had previously. Now this was very cheap, this kit, so you can irrigate something like a greenhouse or a polytunnel or even your garden at a pretty low cost these days, much less than it used to be. So the challenge with this polytunnel is that there is no water on site. So what I'm going to try and achieve is running a drip irrigation system off of a head tank of water. And my header tank is the IBC water tank that I've got. And I'm fortunate that I can fill that with a hose from a neighbour. But I'm hoping to come up with a scheme to get more water into that IBC naturally from rain. So the challenges are getting the water to travel from that point to the furthest point on the hose. And I'm going to keep it really simple. Just one branch of hose with 7 branches off of it to drippers. And they're going to go to the tomatoes. And what you'll find is that as you add another dripper, so the overall pressure in the hose falls a little. So there's not much you can do other than try these things. I'm sure there's some science behind it, but for the average gardener, it's a bit try it and see. So I don't think there's a way of working out whether this is going to work for you. Unless you can add some sort of solar pump to it, which I'm not going to do in this instance, then you really are down to the pressure in the tank and how far and how many drippers it can drive. So hopefully this video will help you ascertain what's possible. And who knows, it may succeed or it may fail, but you've got to try these things. The drippers that I'm going to use are these, and they're a variable dripper. They screw down in sort of notches, and as you tighten them down so that they drip less. And of course, if you're a little bit restricted by the number that you can have on a hose because of the volume of water that it will actually push up the hose, then if you tighten these down a bit, then so the pressure builds a bit, and that enables the others to work. So it's going to be a balance of getting all these set so that they're all dripping, and I think it's going to be trial and error. Well, enough talk. I'm going to start cutting hose and trying to get this system together. So I happen to have this very old hozelock timer, which I've had for probably 20 years, but it's still working perfectly. So if you want to know whether a hozelock timer for hoses lasts a long time, here's the evidence, and it certainly does. So the way that this works, has a number of programs, and you can set it to open and close the valve for different periods of time. And of course that's useful in the polytunnel because I don't want it dripping all the time. In an ideal world, I want to drop a certain amount of liquid at certain times of day for a certain duration, and that's what I'm hoping to get close to. So this hose lock goes onto a standard fitting, and I've got adapters to get it to fit to the IBC, and then it comes with this fitting that connects to this hose in the kit. And if I attach this, I can then run the appropriate length into the polytunnel. So I'm pleased to say that all goes together quite well. It does drip a little when you start adding different fittings to a hose assembly, but that's okay. If it drips a little bit in the polytunnel, I don't mind. So I'm going to get this well and truly fixed on, and then add the hose to it and see how it goes. I'll show you what happens with this timer. It quite simply is run by a battery, and it opens a valve inside. So if I switch it from off to on, so the water starts to come out. And as you can see, the pressure isn't great, so it's going to be interesting to see whether it'll travel to the furthest point at the back of the polytunnel. We'll see. Okay, so for now I'm going to switch this tap off and attach the hose, and it's quite simply unscrew the front fitting, put it over the hose, and then push fit. And a lot of these hose systems, you have to warm the hose up to make it pliable enough to push it on the fittings. Not so with this, it seems to go together very easily indeed. Tighten that down and then fit it to the bottom. There we go. That's in place. And just for good measure, we'll find the end of this somewhere and turn the hose on, there it is, and see what we get. And there we have it. It took a while to get through the hose, but that's the sort of pressure that is going through the full length of the hose. Now I'm hoping I'm not going to use the full length, and if I just hold the pressure for a minute, it doesn't really build up. So that's about what we're dealing with at full length. So I'm going to run it into the polytunnel and see if we can get a reasonable amount of pressure to the furthest dripper, and that'll be the most important test to start with. So this fitting's dripping quite badly, so I'm going to have to come back to this when I've worked everything out and just get a good set of contacts so that we don't get any dripping. But basically I've taken the shortest possible route I can without kinking the hose, and it needs to be workable for me. So it's actually gone round the back and all the way up the edge where the tomatoes are going to be, and now I'm going to make that critical cut. And many of these hose systems, you can just make a stop by bending them over. But with this, you actually want a fitting that you can put a stopper in. So I am going to cut it, and I think I'm going to cut it in that far corner. If I need to go back a little for pressure reasons, then I can shorten it and run one of the smaller gauge fittings through to the last of the tomatoes. So I'm going to make the final cut and see what pressure we've got. Okay, moment of truth. I'll take it right to that corner and cut it there, and then I'm going to fit in one of these stoppers so that I get all the pressure into the drippers. I'm just going to hold that in there while I go and turn the tap on and see what pressure I get at this end. So this really is a moment of truth. You can see the gradient from the tank up to that corner is quite significant. If you were to take a line from the far corner and the height, I think you'd probably get to about the bottom of the tank. And I'm hoping that that head of water will be sufficient to drive it. So let's turn the tap on, open the valve, and we'll go and see. Okay, let's unplug this and see what happens. To get a real comparison, I need to hold it down quite low, but I've got to bear in mind it's going to come up to probably the top of these pots. So there we are, that's not bad. So I think the next step is going to be to plug this and then see if we can put some drippers in and see if they work. So push that all the way home, take the screw on cap which tightens it down, and that's now the end of my hose. And now I have to cut it where I want and put those T-pieces in that will carry the drippers. This is the arrangement I've ended up with at the end of the hose. One stopper, a very small piece of hose, and I needed to do that because these junctions have an input and an output, and then the junction with the small gauge hose outlet. And all I need to do now is decide what length to make that hose. So that comes in this form, and this is the arrangement that you end up with. A small spike to hold the hose in a position that is suitable, and the dripper on the end. Now I don't want to cut these too tight, but equally I want to maintain some flexibility. So I'm going to put this down where it's going to lie and then just see what distance I need to get it to the pot. So that's the length I'm going to go with. I guess if it turned out to be wrong in the end, I could always just swap them around or put in a new piece of hose. It's quite flexible, this system. So I'm going to attach that and then see if we've got a reasonable drip. So these flexible hoses again push on nicely, no real effort. I'm going to lay it down, and I've left it long enough that actually I can test it at this point, which is higher than I would need to because it's going to be down at the top of the pot level. And we'll go and turn that on. I'm going to open it fully and we'll see if we get a drip. Well, I had to make quite a few adjustments in reality. I had quite a bit of a leak back at the tank, and with this kit comes a small piece of PTFE in a roll, and I used that to make sure the threads sealed properly, and I got no leaks now back at the tank. I've also come to realize that, of course, height here makes a very big difference, and the higher you go, the weaker the flow is, to the point where if I get to there is next to no drip, whereas if I come down you can see it increase rapidly as I get to this level. So the tomato that's up this end is going to be the hardest one to feed water to, and that looks quite acceptable. Now what I've got to do is add the others in and see if that's maintained. So that's my next step, and then we can see if this will successfully irrigate the tomatoes while I'm not here. Well, that's got 4 in, and I've decided to just check the pressure on those and see how I'm doing before I add the last 3. So the top, the furthest point away, is still dripping quite strongly, so that's good. And I've set these just to drip gently. This one's going quite strongly, and I'll probably even tighten that down a bit more. This one's dripping slowly, but that's fine. And this one's a little bit faster, so you can tune these so that it works out just perfect. But the main thing for me is that with 3 in, I've still got a really strong flow up here. So on with the last 3, see how I get on. I gotta say, I'm impressed. So that's 7 drippers in, and I've tightened them down quite a lot because it just felt like the right thing to do, and I think there's a lot more scope. I could have a faster dripping if I wanted to, but all of these are going at a fair old rate. And of course the challenge then is how much water each of those drops over a given period of time. And I think I'll do some tests, but basically if I was able to do that twice a day while I'm not here, then that would be so much better than I've ever achieved before. And as long as I've got these trays that gather water, any that does run through can just pool and be soaked up, and then that's a given amount of water for every plant every day. Fantastic. And 7 of these drippers out of a pack, I think, of 20 was incredibly good value. So I recommend this, certainly as a first reaction anyway. So the tank is now not dripping in any way with the use of that PTFE that came with the kit. And of course the pressure in the polytunnel is directly relational to the amount of water in this tank. So I just need to make sure this tank is topped up on a regular basis. Of course not everybody will have a big tank like this, but I think the key is in the height of the water. So you may not have a massive tank, but a water butt or something of that ilk, as long as it was reasonably high, then I think it would do a great job. So for example, if I were to have a water butt up at this level and run the hose down into the polytunnel, I think that would work really well. So there are a number of options. It's just about how much water you can get and how high up you can get it. So I bought this kit on Amazon. It was, I think, £22, and it's got a massive amount of scope just based on how much water you can get high up, and that will obviously determine the amount of drip that you can use. There's only one kit that I could see that had that joint on it that runs the small hose from the large hose, so just look for that and you'll see which kit I used. I don't have affiliate links with Amazon, and I'm not going to in the short term, so just look out for those. And the hozelock, which is called the AC1, or at least it was when I bought it, has a whole variety of programmable settings on it. So if you want to see what it's capable of, pause just here and have a read, and you can see all the variations that you can have with that particular timer, although other timers are available. I do hope you enjoyed the video today. If you did, click the subscribe button, click the like button, and if you want updates from me each time I upload a video, click the bell and select all. I do hope you have a great day. Diolch yn fawr.